I want to talk about the National Security Strategy, which was released last week, kind of in the middle of the night, with a November date, but of course released in December. The National Security Strategy is supposed to be this formal document that codifies an administration's strategic approach to national security.
We are in the bowels of the Pentagon.
It is mandated, and it is supposed to drive a lot of policy issues.
Make your country proud!
And it is supposed to kind of alert the world what the United States thinks of its national security strategy.
Let's take a closer look at this rather disturbing document with Catherine Kluver-Ashbrook. She's an expert on U.S. policy and is senior advisor with the Bertelsmann Foundation.
This one was notable for a bunch of reasons.
Introducing ideas of the Great Replacement Theory, a conspiracy theory which has been entirely debunked, into a national security strategy.
One is that it was white nationalist.
This is an ideological bridge that's being built between some of the most extremist parties on the European continent, some of which internal and, by the way, external intelligence agencies have seen as threats to democracy.
Henry Farrell has a piece that's a really good introduction to what it's supposed to be. He describes it as if this were written by grapers.
I loved it.
Grapers, of course, are Nick Fuentes' Nazi sympathizers.
Non-white people are ruining America, and they're taking welfare, and white people don't want to complain, and we need to get them out.
But it's also super sloppy. It's short. It's just 33 pages, which is unlike the predecessors, including unlike Trump's predecessor from 2017. 9 pages is here's what we're going to do. And the here's what we're going to do section is sort of like, we are going to be utilitarian. We are not going to be driven by values anymore. We're not going to believe in shit like human rights.
It makes clear that this administration believes in this idea of spheres of influence and sets itself alongside other powers which control spheres of influence, i.e. Russia's attempt to control the Eurasian continent, and then, of course, China to control Asia.
They don't specifically say we're not going to believe in shit like human rights, but it's all over the document.
That is a break with 80 years of American foreign policy.
It then lays out what it claims the United States should want. There's about 10 things there. Trump has made 6 of those things far worse, including things like soft power and fighting espionage and influence operations and yada, yada. Also destroying the economy with his tariffs.
That actually disproportionately affects red states, by the way.
It also says, don't mind us if we're going to blow off entire regions of the world. We think that's been a mistake of the past. And then in its discussion of regions, it doesn't call this the Donroe Doctrine.
A play on words of the early 19th century Monroe Doctrine of President James Monroe.
But elsewhere, people are referring to it as the Donroe Doctrine.
Monroe declared the Western Hemisphere closed to future colonization. He also reminded the Europeans that any interference in the Americas would be considered a hostile act against the United States.
Donald Trump claims he is adopting the Monroe Doctrine, and that is his excuse for threatening to invade Venezuela and the murder boats and what have you.
Joining me is Brad Bowman, the Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
One of the unstated premises in this entire document, by the way, is that China is a threat, but only an economic threat.
Now, someone listening to this from the administration say, what are you talking about? We talk about the concerning dynamic over here, this thing that happened right over there. But where's the subject in the sentence? Where's the subject in the sentence?
And the way in which it deals with China is very touchy.
The subject in the sentence, the adversary, name them, call them by name, say it with me. Russia, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are coordinating in extraordinary, unprecedented ways that we have not seen. Don't believe me? Listen to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, who said as much.
And that reflects a touchiness.
We would have been shut down. China would have been shut down. The whole world would have been shut down.
That we've seen in recent days since Trump made the deal with Xi Jinping.
It's not a trade deal. It's a trade truce. And there's still all sorts of tariffs on either side.
To restart trade after China held the United States by its rare earth nuts long enough to get Trump to scream uncle.
I was able to work that out. You don't work that out by not talking to people, by, not answering. So with the magnets, with the rare earth. It was a big...
This document, in my opinion, was written after Trump capitulated to China.
This isn't like toasting each other at cocktail parties in the Kremlin. This is tangible help to each other, economic, cyber, financial, informational, and military domains.
After China had already won a key battle through this trade war against Trump. And so when it discusses China in discussing what it calls the Western Hemisphere, but ignores Canada and probably Mexico entirely, when it discusses China in that context, China is this unnamed entity which is competing in the hemisphere.
It's making each of them more capable in their current or prospective spheres of aggression.
It does discuss China on the Asian stuff, but it doesn't discuss China at all realistically.
Well, I do think your approach to Europe is so different than any of your predecessors.
It discusses Europe not as an entity, but as a problem.
What you laid out in your vision for Europe is what Moscow wants to see.
I have no vision for Europe.
And that section on Europe is the only place it discusses Russia. Typically, these talk about Russia as an adversary. Here, it basically describes how the United States is going to roll over and help Russia destroy the EU via populist parties, AfD and Le Pen and so on.
A Kremlin spokesperson called the strategy document a, quote, positive step and said the adjustments they're seeing are, quote, largely consistent with Moscow's vision.
The document is most alarming for what it says about Europe.
I think Putin sees an opportunity here to deceive Americans and deceive this administration into believing that Ukraine is the problem.
Which basically says, fuck Europe.
You read the part of the national security strategy that talks about Russia, Europe, Ukraine. You'd really think that cultural issues in Europe were the problem. I mean, it's like a cultural indictment of Europe.
You know, we are going to invade Europe.
Hello? The problem is not European cultural issues. The problem is the worst invasion in Europe since World War II, started by the one and only Vladimir Putin, who is a predator pursuing an unprovoked war of choice and brutal conquest.
We are going to interfere in Europe because Europe isn't upholding its side of Western civilization.
Europe could be a whole different place.
Then at the end, it has Africa as this like half page, right? It's not a serious document. It applauds itself for competence, but it is riddled with incompetence.
The Southern Poverty Law Center has made public excerpts of emails sent by White House senior advisor Stephen Miller, who's a key figure shaping immigration policy for President Trump. The email messages from 2015 and 2016 show Miller's support of white nationalist websites and ideologies. Reporter Jean Guerrero joins me now to talk about what these emails say.
There are aspects of it that look like Stephen Miller finished it.
What I found to be the most telling from reviewing some of these emails is that at one point Stephen Miller recommends that they do a story about this book called Camp of the Saints. It's an incredibly racist book that depicts the end of the white world. That's how they put it, the, quote, end of the white world, as a result of an invasion of refugees.
Now that's important because Michael Anton.
So I wrote this piece, the Flight 93 election.
Who is also a crazy wingnut, started it.
A lot of people really mad. And I didn't think any of them would kill me, and none of them have yet.
In fact, back in August, in the wake of the Anchorage meeting,
President Putin, will you stop killing civilians?
First Politico and then Washington Post reported that Michael Anton was leaving the administration for reasons that weren't particularly well explained once he finished the national security strategy. Well, he left in September, and this thing is dated November. So at least 2 months after he left, went into this document.
Stephen Miller is the architect of the Trump administration's border and immigration policies. They've gone after refugees, they've gone after asylum seekers, largely from non-white countries. And so what the emails show and indicate is some of the white nationalist ideologies that may have gone into informing the formation of those policies.
Lawrence Friedman, Comment is Free, speculated in a piece that maybe what happened is Anton left and Stephen Miller dutifully finished it and just threw it out in the middle of the night because it had to be done.
Stephen Miller will do any show from dawn to dusk.
It does have to be done, and that's the feel of the document.
He will make himself available from the first hour of air to the last hour of air on any subject.
But that's interesting, the fact that, we don't know why Anton left before this was finished when he said he was going to leave once he finished this.
I thought I would lose a lot of friends, which I did.
That's interesting because Defense One reported that there's a secret longer version. And that secret longer version is even more aggressive against Europe. It basically says, we're going to cut Europe out of trade. It says, we're going to create an alternative to the G7, which will be called the C5. And the C5 is US, Russia, China, Japan, and India. And therefore, it's built around exclusively economy, no bid to democracy at all. Also, this claimed longer one, and this is something I'm going to write at more length, but it basically says hegemony was a mistake, meaning being the most powerful country in the world and doing so not through coercion, but through influence was a mistake. And that's a crazy thing to say because some of the things that survive in the document that we see claim that they want to have the best soft power in the world. I mean, there is no soft power. They killed it with USAID.
It estimated that USAID's dismantling has already caused the deaths of 600,000 people, 2/3 of them children. That's 400,000 children.
But nevertheless, there's a claim that they still want to be able to influence the world without coercing them. But ultimately, there's no influence in this document. There's no U.S. influence. They've given that up. The other thing that's odd about both the public and this alleged secret version is, and this is something a lot of people talk about, is it tries to turn something that is incoherent.
President Trump has directed the Department of War, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice to prioritize the defense of American lives and borders
into something coherent
by taking the fight directly to these criminal cartels and these foreign terrorist organizations.
One of the areas that has been discussed, again, Stephen Miller may have finished this, is that it literally claims that nations' borders are the most important part of national security. Like, not how big is your military, not your economy, just having borders.
Stephen Miller encouraged Breitbart editors to do a story showing parallels between Camp of the Saints and real life. So Julia Hahn did a story saying that the book was prophetic and that it showed what was going to happen at the border, what was happening at the border, and that potentially immigration was going to lead to the doom of society.
It therefore, on one hand, says we must have the most competent people working always. But it also says we can't have competent immigrants working, which is a contradiction at the core of MAGA anyway, right? Like, if you refuse to compete with immigrants, except for Elon Musk.
Ilhan Omar, who literally was voted into Congress by, large group of people from Somalia who are in Minnesota, which is really far from Somalia, or Mamdani.
Then you obviously aren't hiring the most competent people. One of the areas where I found it even more interesting was it basically said the nation state is the unit of measurement here. That's in the public version. It basically, in the public version, said, we must have sovereignty. Sovereignty, that you would think arises from this focus on borders. We must have sovereignty. But that defies Donald Trump's entire being.
So what do you want to know?
What changes do you want to see at CNN under new
Well, I'm not involved in that. I will be probably involved, maybe involved in the decision. It depends.
Just since this came out, we've got the shenanigans involving the Warner purchase, right? So Netflix is going to purchase it. The board accepted that deal, and Paramount is furious that they didn't get that deal. And they've launched a hostile bid for Warner.
Buried in the fine print, the deal is backed by a private equity firm founded by none other than Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
The Netflix deal doesn't include CNN.
So I think any deal should be guaranteed and certain that CNN is part of it, or sold separately.
The Paramount deal does include CNN. But Paramount is doing this deal with the support of Jared Kushner, who's basically working for the Saudis, of Qatar, of the Emirates,
Oliver Darcy, co-founder of Status.
I think they would love, for instance, White Lotus to be shot in Saudi Arabia. That might get some people heading over to Saudi Arabia and thinking maybe we should go on vacation there.
China's Tencent was involved, but they kicked them out because they thought that that would be a step too far.
I'm sure they would love CNN to maybe be more fair in their coverage of Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Qatar.
So effectively, Larry Ellison is serving as a front for a bunch of foreign oligarchs to take over a big chunk of U.S. entertainment and media. And in this case, it would include CNN, one of the three major cable channels.
There's a lot of soft power at play here.
And that's just one example of the kinds of things Donald Trump does.
The founder of the crypto exchange Binance, a man named Changpeng Zhao, also known simply as CZ, is one of the latest recipients of a controversial presidential pardon. In an interview with 60 Minutes that aired last night, he reiterated a striking admission about the pardon.
Why did you pardon him?
Okay, are you ready? I don't know who he is.
Donald Trump will sell out American sovereignty to anybody who gives him cryptocurrency.
Here is then Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen explaining the company's practices.
Supporting activities from child sexual abuse to illegal narcotics to terrorism across more than 100,000 transactions. That includes transactions associated with terrorist groups like Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS.
Another thing that has happened as this came out is that Donald Trump agreed to sell China the second most advanced NVIDIA chips, giving himself a cut, or giving the White House a cut.
Let's turn to Jean-François Di Meglio, economist and honorary chair at the Asia Center. The United States hardliners have criticized Donald Trump's administration for allowing the sale of thousands of NVIDIA chips to be shipped to Beijing. They say that it could lead to China harnessing that technology for military purposes.
This is something that has been forbidden for years, right?
This is probably part of a wider bargain.
The idea is we limit China's advance by limiting their access to these chips that you need for AI.
So, yes, the US criticism is right. However, it's only a matter of time before China becomes totally autonomous in that sector.
China developed its AI not requiring these advanced chips. Donald Trump says, okay, you can have the chips. China's already saying, we're going to make sure we don't come to rely on these chips.
As the chief law enforcement officer for the Southern District, I have no higher responsibility than safeguarding our nation's security and protecting the American people.
But on the same day that Donald Trump announced that he was going to sell China these chips, prosecutors in South Texas and Houston rolled out an existing prosecution.
Unsealing of the guilty pleas of a Houston-based technology company, How Global, and its owner, Alan Hsu, for illegally smuggling or attempting to smuggle $160 million worth of high-value computer chips out of the United States.
And an incoming prosecution of 3 Chinese men for unlawfully exporting these very chips.
At the same time, we are announcing the arrest of 2 businessmen, Ben Lin Wan and Fan Yu Gong, for their roles in allegedly violating U.S. export controls and smuggling laws by shipping to co-conspirators in China.
So Donald Trump is giving China chips,
specifically NVIDIA H100 and H200 Tensor Core graphic processing units, also known as GPUs.
That until the very same day he did this, it was a crime to take. And China is saying, no, thanks, we don't want them anyway.
China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are coordinating in extraordinary, unprecedented ways that we have not seen. Don't believe me? Listen to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, who said as much.
And that is the kind of confusion of sovereignty that we're in, confusion of hegemony that we're in, confusion of nation state that we're in, because basically the nation state at this point is Donald Trump, and he doesn't much fucking care about the United States, contrary to his slogans, right? So here we are with this national security strategy. It's a mess.
Some of it is understandable. Some of it is understandable.
It has alarmed Europe.
Some of it is unacceptable to us from a European perspective.
By the way, the National Defense Authorization, which is I think, going to be passed this week by both houses of Congress. We'll see what Donald Trump does with it. Counteracts much of this.
The bill limits President Trump's ability to reduce the number of American troops stationed in Europe.
You can't entirely give Ukraine away to Russia.
While also providing $800 million to Ukraine for military assistance over the next 2 years.
This national security strategy is too much for Europe, but it's too much even for Republicans in Congress.
You have to ask the president about that. I'm not sure.
So whatever else it is, it's a mess. It's a sign that the nativists run the show.
And that's what's happening.
It's a sign that the nativists have a wild overestimation of their own competence.
This is a completely true story.
But it's also this kind of disruption, even in an administration which was already volatile and terrifying. This national security strategy is sort of a line in the sand that we're going to be talking about for a while.
Let's make America healthy. Amen.